Hi, and thanks so much for joining us on the Sierra Bible Church Sermon of the Week. We hope you enjoy this message by Pastor Nate Levering.
Amen. Thank you, Norm. It's good news. It's a great story. The reality, right, if we consider for a moment our own kind of personal history, is that every one of us have been kind of thrown in to God's greater story with a part to play, but with a real need for the resurrected Jesus, God in the flesh, to show up in the middle of our story. Our little, yet at least I would push back and say somewhat important, one-of-a-kind part in God's story. On Monday night, Kathy and I were making our way home. We live about a half a mile away from the Peppery, and we were kind of driving down, and what I noticed in the headlights of our car was this cat running across the road in front of us. Part of why I noticed it, because this was not your average house cat. This was probably an 80 or 90 pound cat, not running across the street, but kind of jumping over the street. And maybe you've had those kind of moments before, and you sort of like, wow, am I on safari? Or what was like? And as I reflected on that, so cool kind of Tuolumne County moment to see this sort of mountain lion right in the flesh, I thought, sometimes we kind of associate seeing God in the middle of our story in the same kind of way. We know he's out there. There's enough evidence. He's certainly shown up to other people. But actually seeing him right in the middle of our story, our relationships, our needs, our questions, our beautiful days, well, that's probably, if we're honest, for other people, or maybe a rare sighting. And yet this is Easter. And in Easter, we get to celebrate and live into this incredible truth that God came for us. God sacrificially gave his life to us and declares for us that it isn't a sort of a random sighting. It isn't a kind of historical marker. I have made a way, worn a particular crown, whereby I might enter into your story in kind of every day and every moment. Some have poetically said that it's actually as if God hunts the human heart. And not just for like cleaned up people, not so those, Sunday morning people, they might be the hardest for God to find at times, but for people, lost people, confused people, questioning, broken kinds of people. You see, the truth is, when Jesus entered our world for us and gave his life to us, he came to reverse the effects of sin in our world. And you know where he wanted to start? With us, with our hearts, with our lives. This is why Jesus entered the story. And this morning, we're going to kind of walk through two stories of people in the scriptures that find Jesus right in the middle. And then we're going to give you an opportunity to hear an amazing couple from our community kind of share their own personal story. And some of you will know these stories well. And the first one is really about these four guys who see a friend of theirs, and they think that if we can just get Jesus, what we know of him, what we've experienced about him, right in the middle of our friend's life, like he could change everything. Some of you know, sir, it's recorded in Mark chapter 2, among other places. And so these four buddies, they go to their paralytic friend and they grab his mat and they say, if we just can get your life, I don't know, maybe you're sitting here like, I wonder why they kept sending me invites to come to church on Sunday. And so they bring their buddy before Jesus. And as soon as they get to the home, what they realize is Jesus is teaching and the place is packed. No room to get in, maybe like second service was here. And so what they do is they say, hey, we are determined. We're desperate in some ways that we could get our buddy's life before Jesus, so they climb on the roof, they rip it apart, and they lower their friend. Determined to get Jesus right in the middle of his story. Jesus, we're told, sees their faith. He sees the sort of pain in this man's body and the reality of sin's effect in his physical life. And so, in an amazing, kind of stunning reversal of the effects of sin in his life, Jesus says these words to him: "Son, your sin is forgiven." Okay, let's think about this for a second. If you're the guy that went through the roof and you're laying before Jesus thinking, this is the guy. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of sitting there going, wait, what? I was planning on walking out of here, skipping, flying, high five, wait, huh? And yet what we see when we see Jesus in this story is there's a whole other group of people in the room. And this group of people know exactly what Jesus claimed to have the authority to do. In fact, it's these people that realize that here's this human being who claims to be on equal footing with God himself and offer forgiveness for the human condition. And they actually realize that this is a bigger miracle than helping this guy walk. And so they murmur and they're like, well, who does this guy think he is? And a human being and God, and they can't figure out the story. Maybe like some of us. And so Jesus, having the eyes and hearts of all that are in the room, looking at him, he says then these words. He says, here's what I want you to know. Here's what I want you to hear. Here's what I want you to see. The Son of Man, this is Jesus referring to himself, has what? Has authority. That the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. I came to reverse the effects of sin in the world. And here's what I want you to see. Here's what I want you to know. So he looks at this man on the ground and he says, I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home. So he jumps up. I mean, we kind of picture it, right? He gets up, takes his mat, he walks out in full view. And what we're told is, man, they had that moment where jaw was down and they're like, oh my goodness, we have just witnessed a miracle. We have seen one who has authority over the physical effects of sin in our world. You see, here's the truth of what Jesus is inviting us into alongside these friends. Jesus wants us to know, wait for it, Jesus wants to show the world that by reversing the physical effects of sin, he had the power to reverse the real problem, the spiritual effects of sin. The ultimate tomb. My heart, our hearts. And Jesus is proclaiming this. And what do we see in this little story? But eventually, this paralyzed man is going to get older. His now healed body will eventually fail him to the point of death. And what will matter on that day is not whether or not Jesus had the power to heal his legs, but whether or not Jesus had the authority to forgive his sins. And Jesus declares that he has the power to turn it around. There's another story, and it's familiar, I think, to many of us probably, and it's a story of some siblings, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. It's recorded in John chapter 11, and we're told that, again, they sort of experience this little season, maybe not unlike some of the seasons we go through, where we think we need Jesus now. We may not even know Jesus, right? You've met that person. Maybe you've been that person. I don't pray. I'm kind of an agnostic, sort of. But when the day comes, it's like, I think I love Jesus. Come into my life. Stir up my day. Bring hope. I need something more. And so we begin to pray this family's going through that kind of a day. In fact, John begins to tell the story of what happens with these words. He describes a relationship, which is important as we watch the events move forward, that Jesus has with these three friends. It says that Jesus loved Martha and her sister, this is Mary, and Lazarus. And what we know from the context of the scriptures, Jesus has actually spent time in their home up in Bethany, kind of on the doorstep to Jerusalem. Spent time there. He loved them. They've done ministry together. And this is a moment where they need Jesus in their story. And so what you do when you need Jesus in your story, you go find Jesus. And so rather than leaving their sick brother alone, they send word to get Jesus. He's only a couple miles away, maybe 25 minutes, something like that. If Jesus were to leave now, he could make it up there and be present for his good friends. And so Jesus then goes on to do what any loving Savior with the power to heal would do. John records his actions this way. It says when he, that is Jesus, heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Kind of dilly-dallied around, made himself useful. I'm sure he did some good things. He's just like making it happen. And you kind of get this sense of like, but gee, like what, how, why? And you know, because the disciples are kind of like, what is Jesus doing? Why is he staying? Doesn't he know we've been asked to go? Eventually, Jesus knows that Lazarus has died. And so he says to his disciples, they're again, just a few minutes away. Okay, it's time to go. Let's head on up. Time to go see Lazarus. And in the story, he actually uses an interesting phrase. And Jesus says, let's go wake up Lazarus. He's fallen asleep. Now, the disciples know that at this time in Jesus' life, moving into Bethany and up to Jerusalem sort of was going to be a bit of a challenge for Jesus because of what certain people thought of him. And so they're not all that excited to go. So their response to Jesus in this moment is like, hey, like, if he's just asleep, let him rest, Jesus. I mean, he's been sick. He can wake himself up. And so Jesus does what he often does, I think, when we get the details of the story off a bit. And so Jesus responds to his disciples with these words, spells it out plainly. Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad. Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, and for those of you who have ever looked into the future and wondered, I am glad. And as we said last service, I mean, it had to kind of, suck for Lazarus. But Jesus looks at his disciples, and I think he looks at us, and he says, this all happened for a purpose. This is staged by the Creator God, so that you will know, so that you will have a hope to anchor your heart and its questions to, so that you will live with a foundation that is sure. And so he says, I'm glad that I wasn't there. Why? So that you may believe. He's going to tie some of this together in just a few minutes. And so he says, okay, now it's time. Let's go. Now, if you and I are there, we're thinking, what in the world, Jesus? If you weren't going to heal the guy, at least you could have gone up and said goodbye. I mean, perform last rites, right? Something. And now Jesus is excited to go up to Bethany and then Jerusalem just to not be late for the funeral. And so we would kind of wonder. And so what we're told is they make their way up to Bethany, and as soon as Mary and Martha get word that Jesus has come, they leave the grieving party, or Martha does, and she runs up and makes her way to Jesus. And maybe you've sort of been in this situation before, because what you sense in the story is she's sort of preparing her speech. And I don't know if you've ever driven home and you got some stuff on your heart and you're like, okay, I got to say some things and we're going to prepare a speech, and then nobody's even home when you get there and you're like, I guess I'm preaching this sermon to me. But Martha has this moment, and so she sort of meets Jesus and probably had thought about a lot of different things to say to Jesus in this moment, and yet the emotion and the grief she spells out, and she just looks at Jesus and she's like, why weren't you here? Why didn't you show up when we needed you? You're late. In fact, she goes on to say, if you had been here, Jesus, if you had just been on our page, our brother would not have died. And we hear what she's saying. She's saying, Jesus, I believe, I trust that you have the power to reverse the physical effects of sickness in someone's body. But Lazarus is dead now. And I don't know about you, but from my frame of reference, dead is dead. And now there is no hope. And Jesus does what oftentimes we experience in these moments of grief when we're wondering and we're troubled and we're broken and we're sad. He kind of offers, it almost feels in some ways like this unemotional response to this incredible need and pain. I don't know if you've ever been there at a funeral and pastor person like me says something, you're like, that didn't quite fit. And Jesus almost has one of these moments. And so he greets this, if you had only been here, with these words. He says, your brother will rise again. Like there's more going on. There's a bigger story. Your brother will rise again. And so Martha kind of responds like, okay, that wasn't exactly where I thought we were going. But she sort of says then this. She says, I know he'll rise again. The resurrection at the end of the time. Like I grew up in a Jewish home. I have a Jewish understanding that there's this promise that based on a number of scriptures, there will be a physical resurrection. That God one day will dwell with his people. And they had some things pieced together about life after this life. Do you ever notice how people say odd things at funerals? Pastors especially get to experience this because we get to do a lot of funerals. I love being in those moments with people. But oftentimes we say, and a lot of grace, right? Because you're going through hard things and you're struggling. But my dad passed a few years ago, and a lot of people knew him. So like everybody that I'd bump into, like, oh, there's Nate, his dad just passed. I should say something. Sometimes you shouldn't say something, but sometimes you should, and it's great. This one particular gentleman I'll never forget. He comes up to me. It's only been a couple days since my dad passed. And he says, oh, I loved your dad. He was a great man. We'll miss him. And then they say what all of us say, which is, I'm sure he's in a better place. A lot of truth in that. He's in a better place. Body's healed. All that's good. But while prepared for that, I was not prepared for what he said next. He said, but at least I'm sure by now he's reacquainted with his dog. And when you're in those moments, you're like, did I just hear, like, did he say dog? Did he? How? And all of me is like, okay, don't say anything because it's just going to be sarcastic and sort of mean. Save it because you could preach it someday. Imagine for a moment, right? My dad, he's in heaven and meets Jesus, and she's like, yeah, here's the wounds. Here's how I gave my life. Jesus, it's good to see you. But have you seen my dog, Roxy? Like, I've been looking everywhere for him. And why do we say those things? Because for the most part, we don't know. And just like in Jesus' day and our day, we're like not exactly sure how it all. And Jesus came to anchor our hope and to flip the consequences of sin in our world. And he wants to start with us. In Jesus' day, there were a number of theories as to what happened after this. You maybe hear some of these pagan stories, right, where you're going to become a star. Carl Sagan actually pulled some of this, and he said, we all kind of are made with this like star stuff in us. The Greeks, although we spelt it wrong on this, believed that there was a place called Hades, not Hades, Hades, so thank you very much. I can't spell, and occasionally it comes out on here. But the Greeks believed that we're all going to end up in one place, but how that's sorted out, we don't exactly know. It was Socrates that really kind of put some flesh on this understanding of the immortality of the soul. And for him, it was like these bodies just wear out anyway. They're part of the evilness of the world. Once we get rid of those, we'll actually experience a level of freedom, which was not the Jewish understanding and certainly is not Jesus' understanding. It was Plato who took Socrates' understanding and wrote on this idea of a sort of a differentiated afterlife. What he realized was that there is actually kind of two kinds of people in the world. Like on this side of the room, there's some pretty good people. But over on this side of the room, it was looking good until Jeremy said, like, just some of us are, And what Plato said was this, is that in the afterlife, okay, we're going to have a soul, but our soul's going to go to two separate places. Then there's this Jewish understanding that Martha had. It's why she's in this conversation this way with Jesus, that one day there will be kind of a resurrection of the body. And this physical thing God gave us was a gift from God. And he's going to restore it. And again, once fully and finally do away with the effects of sin in it. And he's going to raise them again. We hear Paul's words. He says Jesus was the first fruit in his resurrection of what one day will happen. And so Jesus leans in and says, if you have questions about this, I want to demonstrate a reality that's coming. So he enters into this conversation with her. And then Jesus says these words. He says that, resurrection is not a category. It's not a theory. Jesus leans in. In this moment of grief and challenge, Lazarus is in the tomb. He's been there 4 days. And Jesus says this, I am the resurrection. And I am, Jesus promises, the source of life. Find me, you'll have those. The one who then he says believes in me, and it's this picture of not sort of intellectual assent as much as trusting someone to carry our lives, trusting someone with our future, trusting someone with control over our lives. Jesus says, whoever believes in me will live, will have that life, even though they physically are going to experience the consequences of sin in their physical body. And then it gets a little bit confusing, I think, in some ways. And Jesus says, whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And so maybe Martha's like, like some of us are like, wait, what? Where do I get the life? And who's going to die and how? And what Jesus does next is fascinating. And I really believe it's part of our story if we look back and Jesus is in it. He says, I understand you're not going to sort of be able to connect all the dots. And so rather than Martha trying to explain it all to you again, I want you to experience it. I want you to come to me. If you ever had that experience of a great meal, you try to describe it to someone and they're like, okay, I think I'm bored right now. I'm not even really hungry. Rather than explaining it, they need to taste it. And Jesus invites us to taste the life he's had. And so he looks back at Martha then with this question. This is our question. He says this, do you believe this? Do you believe me? Are you willing to put your trust, not knowing how all the dots connect, in me, the one with the authority over, who's come on your behalf to reverse the effects of sin, not only in our physical world, but in our spirits as well. And so then she has this great answer, right, in this moment, and you can just see her. She's kind of drawn into Jesus. Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe. In other words, I don't understand it all, but I believe that you are the Messiah. You are the Son of God who has come into our world. Yes, Lord, as best I know. Yes, Lord, I want to be, yes, Lord, I need you in my story today. And I want to invite you to watch a video for about 5 minutes, and we'll have a couple from our church family talk about how Yes, Lord has changed everything in their lives. And so I want to introduce you to Robert and Jody. Well, good morning, SBC family. It's a privilege of mine to introduce you to Jody and Robert, who responded to an invitation to share a bit of their story. And Jody, I always love hearing you talk about your faith in Jesus, and specifically when Jesus gets involved in those days and how he shows up and surprises you. And, you know, and sometimes those are hard days, right? And there are those days where we don't even want to be involved. But when Jesus is there and when Jesus gets room to do what only he can do, he begins to put pieces together and heal and show us himself in new and amazing ways. And you've experienced some of those. We've shared that. So tell us a little bit about what led up in your own story to seeing Jesus here just recently in your lives, and even how that's played out.
Okay, so I am going to share some of my story, where it began. My parents divorced when I was 4 years old, and since then they have remarried. I never really experienced a healthy interaction between them my whole life. When our oldest son, Joshua, took his life at 19 years old, and in our deepest pain, Jesus was there. And for the first time, I saw my parents come together and put their differences aside. There was hope. 5 years later, my youngest sister, Jana, died of alcoholism. And after her death, I watched a devastating division between my parents. Through these last 12 years, my struggles of hurt and grief, watching my parents' resentments and unforgiveness toward one another, were also consuming and affecting me as well. My faith in Jesus was the only one who could heal these broken relationships. So God gave me the courage and strength to share with my parents about 2 years ago that I needed to be authentically me and to love them all, regardless of how they felt about one another. So this is where Jesus changed everything for me. While playing with my grandkids, Jesus showed up, and I witnessed my parents talking to one another, being kind and cordial. When we were all leaving, I witnessed my mom and stepmom give each other a hug. In awe of what I witnessed, the next morning, God spoke to my heart for me to write one letter to all my parents, sharing with them that where there was pain and grief in my heart, it had been replaced with love, gratitude, joy, and peace. With God's perfect timing and a ladybug, I am free.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I know it's a lot of work to write those things down and to try and do it in a concise way that packages these huge emotions that have been a part of the heartbreak, but also watching God before your eyes, right? In your real life, put some of these things back together and bring hope. So thank you so much. And Robert, has shared in life in a bunch of different ways and has been part of this story as a support, but also living it. So talk to us, Robert, about how when Jesus has showed up in your own story in these past years of walking through some tragedy and then just life together, how he showed up and brought you the experience of freedom in this life.
Yeah. So, freedom. What God freed me from was from the pain and the guilt that I experienced in the loss of my son. The guilt of, maybe not sharing the right words with him or being able to help him. What God has done is that freedom that he's given me and that I've experienced is not that I don't still experience the pain and the guilt at times, but I'm not stuck in it. His freedom has allowed me to feel those emotions and to move on, to move forward. And by doing so, I'm able to, build a strong relationship with Jesus. And I'm so very grateful for that. It's a great thing to be able to share Jesus with others and what he has for them.
And to share that out of the experience in your own life where he showed up and proved himself faithful. I love it. Love how you guys are doing that in so many different ways, in ways that expose the deepest hurts, right? And the deepest questions. It's just a beautiful thing for those of us that get to walk alongside in life. And so here we are, Easter 25. And just wanted, Robert, for you to kind of lean into our church family this Easter and just encourage us in how you might maybe lead us or push us forward in our own relationship with Jesus.
Yeah. So I would just encourage everyone, whether you're in a relationship already with Jesus, or maybe you're thinking about it, or maybe you haven't thought about it. Maybe you're just, here with some friends, to dive in, to look to Jesus and receive him and get into a relationship with him and allow him to work in you. Because when he does that, you'll experience that kind of freedom. And that's really what me and Jody want everybody to experience, because it's amazing. It's hard to put in words, but we would like to see everybody experience that. And he has that for everyone.
He does.
It doesn't matter. You may think, I don't deserve that freedom, or I can't get that freedom. Well, you can. But the only way to do it is through that relationship with Jesus. And he's waiting for you if you're not already there. And if you're already there, open up and really allow him.
See what God has.
See what he has for you. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys both in so many ways. We appreciate you. We want to sum up the story and maybe even invite for some of us in a fresh way a response this morning. And so if we were going to sum up the story, I think it maybe is this: that Jesus reverses the power of sin and the presence of death by taking upon himself at the cross the sum total of all human sin, yours, mine, and theirs. Jesus rose again on the third day with a promise in hand and a rightful crown upon his head. Jesus alone has the power to reverse the effects of sin in your life. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Paul said it well this way. It's from the Message translation, and I love, maybe for some of us that are thinking, I think I believe this. What does the next step look like? What does this look like for me to embrace the truth of what Jesus has done and who he is? Paul says this after spelling out in incredible detail to a letter he wrote to the church in Rome, all of the details of who Jesus was and what he had done. He kind of wraps it up. He says, this is the core of our preaching. Say the welcoming word to God. Jesus is my master. Embracing, by saying this, in body and in soul, God's work of doing in us what he did in raising Jesus from the dead. That's it. You're not doing anything. You're simply calling out to God, trusting him to do it for you. That's salvation. With your whole being, you embrace God setting things right. And then you say it right out loud. God has set everything right between him and between me. I think one of the great privileges of being a dad has been to carry my children around in the world. I could probably tell you about mile after mile after mile. I've carried our 4 children. They get tired. Dad, I need a ride. I hoist them up and we go. I don't want to mention any names, but our daughter Kira's favorite words for a season of her life from like 2 to 6 were uppy. Have you ever had this kid? Uppy, 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 uppy. And I would lift her up, and 3 or 4 miles into wherever we were going, I figured I owned it because we would hike further than their little legs could go and push harder. And so I'd be carrying her around, and then, it's always sort of that moment when it's like, okay, now I think I'm finally done. And I would just throw her up on my shoulders, and she would ride around and laugh and hit me in the head, and she pulled all my hair out, as you can tell. This was just life, and I loved it. We adopted these 2 little boys. Many of you know our story. And the youngest never did really like to walk around much. And so he would need a ride whenever we went anywhere. And so I'd pick him up. I don't know if you ever had that kid that was like dead weight. They're just like, oh. Like, how you only weigh 30 pounds, but you feel like you weigh like 100. This was him. And I would kind of carry him around until I was a little older too. And I will never forget the first time I threw this little guy on my shoulders, and I realized instantly this may have been the first shoulder ride he'd ever experienced, because he was ripping my ears out and gouging my eyeballs in absolute fear. Had no idea if I'd hold him, had no idea if I would drop him. Didn't matter that I had only, in all these rides, only dropped my kids once that I can remember. He was in fear. And maybe this morning, you've never, if you're honest and you just take stock for a second, you've never answered the do you believe this with a yes, Lord. Certainly not one out loud. Certainly not a physical response. And yet maybe the Lord's been speaking to you this morning. And maybe he's bringing clarity around the hope that he is. And I just want you to know that for so many of us, it feels like that first shoulder ride. Like, what do I hang on to now? God, if I have to let go and trust you, I'd like to grab. Jesus says, I'm going to walk with you in every day. I'm going to be a part of your story. You can say, yes, Lord, I've never dropped any of my children. And so maybe you'd want to respond. For a moment of response before we jump to our feet and worship our Lord, I just want to invite you to kind of close your eyes and maybe bow your heads. And if you this morning want to come to this place where, like Paul reminds us, that where we just get to say, Jesus is my master. I'm done being master of my heart. I want to trust in who he is and what he's done. And maybe you've never come to that place before. I just want to invite you in this moment to just look up, to just make eyes with me and say, man, I want to make a yes, Lord moment. I want to experience his salvation. I want to experience him in the good and the bad and the tough. And maybe for you, when you take stock, if you're honest, you walk through life like all of us do in different seasons, and we think about God showing up in our story a little bit like a mountain lion sighting. Yeah, he probably does in other people's life. And maybe this morning, in a renewed Easter 25 kind of way, you want to say, God, I need you right in the middle of my story. Give me eyes to see you. And maybe if that's you and you've been kind of like, I'm sure he's out there, but you want to make it a little bit more personal this morning. Can I invite you just to look up? And just to say, man, I want to have eyes to see him. I want to stand in awe and experience the goodness of who he is. And we want to invite all of us to stand to our feet. We've carved out some time to come before the Lord in worship and to celebrate our answer to the question that Jesus has, do you believe?
Thanks so much for joining us, church. We hope that you enjoyed this message. To find more messages like this, or to see where you can get connected or to give financially, please visit sierrabible.com.